It started with the clock. I had just moved into an old rental, a charming little place with creaky wooden floors and a backyard that felt like it had stories to tell. On my first night, I noticed the clock in the living room, a large, antique thing with a pendulum that swung silently. I hadn't put it there. I assumed it was left by the previous tenant. That night, as I was unpacking, the clock chimed. Not the soft, pleasant kind of chime you'd expect, but a deep, resonant toll that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It startled me because it was almost midnight, and I was sure the clock had no hands. I checked, it didn't. Just an empty face where the time should be. The next night, it chimed again. This time, it was louder, and the toll came at exactly 11:53. I know because I checked my phone. Something about the sound made me uneasy, but I told myself it was just an old, weird clock. The third night, I heard it again, 11:53, the toll reverberating through the house. But this time, the pendulum had stopped. It hung perfectly still, yet the chimes rang louder than ever, shaking the air like a thunderclap. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided to get rid of the clock. I dragged it to the curb, shoving it onto the sidewalk with a sense of relief. But when I came home that evening, it was back. Not just back in the house, back in its spot in the living room, as though it had never been moved. I called the landlord, but he claimed there had never been a clock in the house. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. That night, the clock chimed again at 11:53, but this time, the sound didn't stop. It just kept tolling, over and over, the noise growing louder until it felt like the walls were shaking. I covered my ears, but it was inside me, vibrating in my skull. When I couldn't take it anymore, I stormed into the living room. The clock's face wasn't empty anymore. It had hands now, both pointing to 11:53. The glass was fogged over, but as I stared, a shape appeared, something moving inside the clock, pressing against the glass from the other side. It looked like a hand. I backed away as the pendulum began to swing again, this time violently, as though something inside was trying to break free. The last thing I remember is the glass shattering, and then, nothing. I woke up the next morning on the floor, surrounded by shards of glass. The clock was gone. The house was silent. But every night since, at exactly 11:53, I hear it chime again, somewhere far away. And I know one day, it's going to find me.